Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Heavy Metal Muscle. So, you think you're ready for performance-enhancing drugs? As a fitness coach, I seem to get messaged a lot on Instagram and other channels and social medias, especially from young guys, from teenagers to early 20s, about specifically anabolic androgenic steroids and SARMs. So, I want to talk about them. And if you want to dive in further, I would suggest checking out Leo Longevity, More Plates, More Dates, Greg Doucette, even Ryan Ankrum. There's lots of channels specifically for PEDs, or performance enhancing drugs. So I would suggest checking them out if you're going to suggest this further. And again, this is for entertainment purpose only, as my disclaimer says. But let's dive into it. So, what do they do? Well, they increase recovery by increasing protein synthesis, and they help maintain muscle mass, especially on a caloric deficit. So it's not like you take it like, have you seen Space Jam, where they take the stuff and just balloon up into huge muscular creatures, or like a star mode in Mario, or I think there was even a steroid mode in the Duke Nukem games where you inject and it goes, all right, then, and just like surging with energy. So it's no stimulants, none of that. It's going to take you like couple weeks or so to probably notice you're even on stuff because you're recovering. It's like, oh, my chest is not as sore as it was normally. I'm like, say if I worked out chest Monday, normally it'd be sore Tuesday and Wednesday, so I could maybe work out it again Thursday or Friday, but it's fully recovered by Wednesday. Like, that's what it'd be like, to be honest. So it's not, well, on that, you could see that you still have to put in the work. It's not a miracle drug that replaces all effort in the gym, these compounds. You gotta put in the diet, you got to put on the exercise. So if you don't have those things already figured out, there's no point in even starting because you're not going to get the best benefit of having them. You only have so many cycles really in the tank that your body could handle because these things aren't good for you. So you want to take the most out of them. So as Lee Priest, I've heard say, is it's icing on the cake. You should be lifting for quite a few years at least to have reached your maximum natural potential and learn all you can learn about diet, exercise, everything. And also, you need to find out what your natural testosterone levels are. Because if you're already high, like if you're like a young teenager into his mid-20s and such, you're probably running on great amounts of testosterone. You don't even need to take testosterone boosters or any of these androgen receptor modulators or androgen anabolic steroids. You don't need to take this stuff if you have a lot of testosterone already. You got a lot of potential to grow, especially if you're getting started. You have the newbie gains. You'll gain probably 10 pounds in your first year having high natural testosterone levels. So take advantage of that before you even think of taking PEDs. And when I mentioned knowing what your testosterone levels are before you do any of this stuff, how are you going to find that out? Well, you need to do blood work. So you should meet a doctor to help you, and a sports doctor specifically, so they know what your blood work will look like from having a high protein diet and exercising, say for going through your kidney and assessing the health of that. They should use the statin C and know about using that test, because a general practitioner, a lot of times, if they don't work with people who lift weights, they might ask, did you have a car accident? Your creatinine levels are way out of whack. It's like, no, I exercise. I lift weights. I deadlifted yesterday. Yes, it was 500 pounds, but I deadlifted yesterday. I'm not going to die. So you need to have a doctor who's knowledgeable in this field of sports and nutrition and up to date with all this current info. Though they should know most likely about what it's like to have a high fat diet, like a keto diet. They should know what it's like to have a high protein diet. All these things they should have, because you need that resource. And also, if you're going to take steroids and testosterone, where you have to inject, you want to have access to, with your doctor, for antibiotics. Because if you get an infection, you don't want to lose your arm or something, or even die or something like that to happen to you. And need the PCT, post-cycle therapy drugs, in before you start. And some of them, like HCG, which stands for human chorionic gonadotropin, which is, oh, I'll get into it later, but it's pretty much the signal that your body does to tell your body to produce more testosterone. That stuff is not easy to find in underground labs and pharmaceutical grade. And you want to know you got the legit stuff, because you're wanting to stop taking these performance enhancing drugs at this point. You're wanting to recover from having your testosterone suppressed. So, and also on that, before I move on to what suppression is, doctor will also help you identify any red flags for potential issues you might have by pushing the boundaries. Like maybe you have a heart issue. Like, for example, Dallas McCarver, what's his name? Dallas is a bodybuilder, died just a few years ago, and he was in his 20s, and he had a heart condition, and that got exacerbated by steroid usage. So you want to find out that if there's anything genetically or physiologically of your makeup that has potential of going wrong by taking these drugs. You want to know that before you start. So a doctor is huge. So now, suppression. What is suppression? Well, let's back up and say how your body produces testosterone. Well, your hypothalamus and pituitary gland control and regulate your testosterone production by communicating with your gonads to tell them to produce testosterone. So it recognizes how much testosterone and estrogen you have, and it tells your equipment down there to say, hey, come on, buddies, let's produce some testosterone. And it helps regulate that. And naturally, that fluctuates throughout the day based on how much sleep you have, what foods you're eating, your stress levels. All these things can change your testosterone levels. So keep that in mind too when you're going to get blood work. Any compound you take that's a performance-enhancing drug that targets your androgen receptor, which is anything from steroids to SARMs, they're all going to suppress you. All of them. So it's best to do a post-cycle therapy after, because you want to come back to your natural test levels. And that's why you want to do the blood work before you started. So that way, you know, after you've done this cycle for, what is it, like a 6, 8, 12 week, whatever you might going to do, that after this, you're going to recover. Because if you don't, you most likely have to be on testosterone replacement therapy, which I'll get into a little bit later here. But with the PCT, know that you may not recover to your natural levels. You might be able to do, well, you might just be one cycle and might not recover. Even if you do PCT, post-cycle therapy, you might be able to do 10 cycles. You might have to do 1,000 cycles. You don't know how many cycles you have in the tank that you could do that your natural systems will come back. You don't know. So if you're scared of needles, for example, stay away, because if you don't recover, you're going to have to be on testosterone replacement therapy, which means being on a prescription for testosterone to take it exogenously for the rest of your life, potentially. And that would be taking it minimum 1 time a week, best to be even every other day. Or the more times you take it, the better steady levels you have in your system. Some doctors and some TRT clinics might prescribe you once every 2 weeks. But then what happens is you're on a super physiological steroid cycle. And then by the end of that 2 weeks, you're like an old grandma. And if you're low in testosterone, most likely be depressed, low sex drive, loss of muscle mass, depression. A lot of issues can happen if you have low testosterone levels. So it's not a good thing to have them low and not recover. So know for this post-cycle therapy, this is based on bro science. This isn't something that's been studied medically. And there's no, related to this, there's no FDA approved hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis recovery drug that's currently available. So there's no FDA approved drug. This is something that us bros have figured out or tried to figure out, and it's all anecdotal pretty much. And usually it's HCG or human chorionic gonadotropin, Clomid, or a SERM, which is selective estrogen receptor modulator. And like another example of this would be tamoxifen, also known as Novadex. And you want to have these drugs before you start because you want to be able to recover after, and not easy to access these drugs, especially HCG commonly. And you might need to get that from a doctor. So again, you want to have a doctor, you want to have blood work, all these things in check before you even start. You want to have all the drugs, everything in line before you start this path. And again, you might not recover. So it's not something you want to dabble in, because you might have to be on TRT for the rest of your life. And this is a lifetime commitment. If you're going to go down the performance enhancing drug route, know that it might become a lifetime commitment, and you don't know. It's a risk. If you're scared of the risk and you're afraid of needles and blood work and going to the doctors more and all that stuff that could go with that, don't dabble in this. It's something to take seriously. That could be a life-changing thing that you're doing. And another thing with this PCT, to do it effectively, you need to know when to start. And to know when to start your PCT after you've finished your cycle of steroids or SARMs or whatever combination of compounds you're using, you need to know the half-life of every of these compounds, because if not enough of it's out of your system, it's still replacing that the hypothalamic pituitary gonad axis loop. If it's still replacing that connection by telling your brain it got enough testosterone and it's replacing it, then your PCT is not going to work to try to signal things to fire up again down there to produce testosterone. So you need to know when to take it, and it's based on what compounds you're taking. So you need to do the research ahead of time to have this done, to increase your chances of it being successful. And I get this asked a lot, and I know it comes up all the time on the internet and stuff, is, oh, what if I just took orals then? I'm afraid of needles. Well, if you took orals like an Anavar or Danabol or these things, some of them, like Danabol, was researched to replace testosterone as a potential TRT that's oral. But all these orals will lower your testosterone, they're all suppressive, and most of them aren't going to aromatize into estrogen and won't replace your testosterone, so you need to take testosterone with it at the same time. If you don't, what will happen is you'll have less gains, and you'll most likely have the symptoms of low testosterone by the end of your cycle. And also, any oral steroid you take are going to be treated with a 17-alpha alkalization modification. And that's just the chemical makeup of these oral compounds that allows steroids to be taken orally, enter the liver, and then have a controlled release time. And that controlled release time through your liver is hepatotoxic. It's hard on your liver. So orals are way harder on your liver than taking injectables. So even though you might be scared of needles, it's safer more often than not to have the injectable compounds than the orals. Now, SARMs. So these are relatively new. They started to be researched back in the 90s, and we found the scientific community found some candidates in around 1988. And so that's when research started. And most of them haven't done through rat studies or mouse studies, and only a couple have gone through preclinical and phase 1, phase 2 human clinical trials. So it's very new, very little researched. And people are taking this, especially young guys and even females, not knowing the research, because the research isn't there. And we're assuming, based on bodybuilding forums and a little bit of anecdotal evidence that people are spreading, creating rumors basically that these things are safer and you don't have to take testosterone, no needles, and all these things compared to steroids. But we don't know where steroids, those started in the 40s with the Germans, and it's been something well studied. And say, for example, Anavar and Primobolan were studied for women and children. And, well, and medically, after testosterone, we're always trying to find something for cachexia, burn victims. Cachexia is the muscle loss usually caused by cancer, or birth control for men. These things that we're researching medically, we're always trying to find something more selective, something that we just target muscle tissue or whatever the medical application might be. These why these things are being created. So we don't know the research or the long-term effects of the research for the long-term effects is in for these selective androgen receptor modulators, these SARMs. And now, like, for example, one that's very common that you've probably heard a lot at your local gym is RAD140 from Radius Health. And it used to be the thought that it was like a 16 to 20 hour half-life and not liver toxic at all, not very suppressive. Well, some of the data is coming in and finding out as a very long half-life, extremely suppressive. Well, when I say extreme, it's the same, if not more than, say, Anavar, which is a oral steroid. So just comparing those two, the one that's not very much research and you think is safer is actually, we're finding out to be just as suppressive as Anavar and perhaps not even as selective. So again, the research isn't in. It might be great in the future. We're always trying to find something more selective, and that's what the research is trying to do, but the research isn't in yet. It's still ongoing. So you're taking a big risk taking SARMs until the research is in. And because we're finding these are suppressive, it has all the same risks that I mentioned with steroids and oral steroids. So keep that in mind, whatever SARM you're going to be doing, if you choose to. And even in general, anabolic androgenic steroids and SARMs in a bodybuilding recreational context for cosmetic and gains and performance gains, these things hasn't been studied a lot in the medical community for that reason. Because I said they were for like cachexia, burn victims, and other times where we need some anabolism in your patient for a medical purpose. And that isn't for like, oh, I want to have another 10 or 20 pounds of muscle and be able to keep more muscles. I'm cutting down. Like that stuff isn't very much research. There's people like the anabolic doc and such that are in this field researching it, but there isn't a lot of medical assistance you can get. So this is definitely something to be risk for. Another risk is left ventricular hypertrophy, which is the enlargement of the heart, and it could lead to potential heart attacks. And in general, if you're going to take these things to support more muscle mass, there's the inherent health risks with that, because muscle is harder for your body to maintain than fat. Fat, you don't really need to have a lot of oxygen and blood flow in there, but muscle has 2 to 3 times the blood vessels, and you need to have oxygen and minerals and all this stuff. And so it's a lot of work for your heart and organs to maintain all that tissue. And that's why, especially nowadays where open bodybuilding has gotten so much bigger for the athletes for what the relative weight is compared to the golden era. Like Arnold's day, they were like, he was like 237, and Frank Zane was like 185. And now guys are pushing 300 like Big Ramy. And you're seeing people like Rich Piana and others that the mass monsters dropping in their early 40s because, well, their bodies just can't sustain that. And it's really hard on their systems to try to keep all that muscle. So it doesn't take much to push their bodies too far and have a heart attack and drop dead. So know all these risks before. So let's collect this all. So you need to have a doctor. You need to do blood work. You need to not be afraid of needles. You need to realize this might be a lifetime commitment. You need to learn all this stuff and do all your research before you go down this road. So, now that I've told you all this, do you still think you're ready for PEDs? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll catch you next time on Heavy Metal Muscle.